В 2006 году.
An old man sits beside a woman whose memories keep slipping away, and every day he opens the same worn notebook. He reads as if the words inside can pull her back from somewhere unreachable. The story begins in 1940 in the small town of Seabrook, South Carolina. 17-year-old Allie Hamilton arrives for the summer with wealthy parents, polished manners, and a future already planned for her. Then Noah Calhoun sees her at a carnival. He can't look away. Allie barely notices him, so Noah does something reckless. He climbs onto the Ferris wheel while she's riding with another boy and hangs high above the ground, refusing to let go until she agrees to a date. She thinks he's insane. Maybe he is. But beneath the teasing and arguments, something sparks between them. And neither of them realizes this summer will become the memory they spend a lifetime trying to hold on to. Their first real date feels less like romance and more like a challenge. Noah takes Allie to an empty street, lies down in the middle of the road, and tells her to trust him. She calls him crazy again, but seconds later she lies beside him. Under the quiet night sky, their laughter softens into something neither of them can hide. From that moment, they become almost impossible to separate. They dance without music, race along the beach, argue over nothing, then kiss like the argument never mattered. Noah has little money. Allie comes from privilege. Their worlds should never fit together. But that summer, they do. And the deeper Allie falls for him, the more dangerous their love becomes. Because her parents are watching, and they already know exactly the kind of man they expect their daughter to marry. Noah is not that man. Allie's parents see the difference immediately. She comes home glowing, distracted, no longer behaving like the daughter whose future they had carefully arranged. Her mother especially hates what Noah represents, a life outside their control. Then the arguments begin. One night, after Allie stays out too late, her parents confront her. Noah arrives, and the tension explodes. Harsh words are thrown, class, money, reputation, everything becomes a weapon. Allie is furious, torn between the boy she loves and the family she has always obeyed. And suddenly, the summer is over. Her parents decide they are leaving Seabrook early. Allie runs to Noah, desperate to explain, but anger gets between them. Words are said that neither truly means. She leaves believing they will somehow find their way back. Noah watches the car disappear. What Allie doesn't know is that he has no intention of letting her go. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. And Noah writes. Every morning, every night, whenever the silence becomes unbearable, he sits down and pours everything he cannot say into a letter for Allie. He tells her he still thinks about the carnival, about the empty road beneath the stars, about the way she laughed when she forgot she was supposed to behave like someone else. He apologizes for their last fight. He tells her he loves her. One letter, then another. 365 letters in 1 year. But Allie never answers. From Noah's side, the silence feels like an answer all by itself. Eventually, he stops writing, not because the love disappears, but because carrying hope every day has become too painful. What Noah never knows is that Allie never sees those letters. Her mother takes them, every single one. And while Noah is trying to understand why Allie has abandoned him, Allie is living with a completely different wound. She waits. She wonders. She tells herself that if Noah truly loved her, he would have written. Two people still in love. Both convinced the other chose to let go. Then the world changes. War pulls Noah far away from Seabrook. He enlists with his closest friend, Finn, trading quiet southern streets for explosions, mud, and the constant knowledge that any ordinary second could become his last. The romantic boy who once hung from a Ferris wheel now watches men disappear beside him. Then Finn is killed. There is no dramatic goodbye. No time to prepare. One moment his friend is there. The next he isn't. Noah returns from the war carrying a silence heavier than before. His father welcomes him home and gives him something unexpected. The means to finally buy the abandoned plantation house Noah once showed Allie. That broken house had been their impossible dream. Allie had stood inside it years earlier, sunlight cutting through dusty windows, and told Noah exactly how she imagined it. A white house, blue shutters, a room overlooking the water where she could paint. So Noah begins rebuilding, board by board, wall by wall. He works until his hands split. He paints the house white. He adds the blue shutters. He creates the room she wanted. To everyone else, it looks like determination. But underneath every hammer strike is a memory. Allie. Meanwhile, her life has moved in another direction. During the war, she volunteers as a nurse, tending wounded soldiers whose bodies remind her how quickly youth can be destroyed. There, she meets Lon Hammond Jr., a handsome, confident young lawyer from a wealthy Southern family. Lon is everything her parents wanted: educated, successful, respectable, and unlike Noah, he belongs naturally in Allie's world. Lon courts her with charm instead of chaos. There are elegant dinners, family approval, clean suits, easy smiles. No one tells Allie she is throwing away her future when she is with him. Eventually, Lon proposes. Allie says yes. Her parents are thrilled. The engagement is announced. Photographs are taken. Everyone sees a perfect young couple moving toward a perfect life. And maybe Allie almost believes it too. Until one afternoon, while trying on her wedding dress, she opens a newspaper. There is Noah, standing in front of the restored house. The white house, blue shutters, exactly as she once imagined it. Allie freezes. The room around her seems to vanish. The voices become distant. Her fingers tighten around the newspaper as years collapse into a single heartbeat. Noah had remembered. Every detail, every promise. Everything she had forced herself to bury suddenly comes rushing back. The summer heat, his hands, their fights, their laughter, the way she once believed loving him was the simplest truth in the world. Her face loses color. Then her body gives way. Allie faints in her wedding dress, and when she wakes, one terrifying fact is waiting for her. She is about to marry another man while part of her heart is still living inside a white house in Seabrook. So Allie makes a decision. She tells Lon she needs a few days away. Then she gets into her car and drives toward the past, toward Noah, toward the question she has spent years refusing to answer. The road back to Seabrook feels longer than Allie remembers. Every mile pulls her farther from the life waiting for her. Lon, the wedding, her parents, the future that makes perfect sense on paper, and closer to the one question she never truly buried. Then she sees the house. White walls. Blue shutters. For a moment, Allie simply sits inside her car, staring. The place she once imagined as a teenage girl is standing in front of her like Noah somehow reached into the past and built the memory with his own hands. And then Noah appears. He stops. So does she. Years of silence sit between them. Allie forces a smile and says she saw his picture in the newspaper. Noah tries to act casual, but his body betrays him. He cannot stop looking at her. She is older now, dressed differently, carrying herself like a woman whose life has moved far beyond that reckless summer. Then Noah notices the engagement ring. Something in his face changes, only slightly. But Allie sees it. She tells him she is getting married. Noah congratulates her. The word comes out clean, polite, almost effortless. Almost. They walk through the house together, and every room feels haunted by who they used to be. Allie touches the walls. She sees the painting room overlooking the water. Noah remembered that too. She asks why he rebuilt the place. Noah gives her a simple answer, but the truth is everywhere around them. He built it because he couldn't forget her. Neither of them says that aloud. Not yet. The next morning, Noah asks Allie to come with him. He takes her out onto the lake in a small boat, rowing through water covered with birds. For a while, they barely speak. They don't need to. The quiet between them is full of everything they are afraid to ask. Then rain begins falling, softly at first, then harder. They rush back toward the dock, soaked and laughing, and for a few seconds they are 17 again. No wedding, no lost years, no parents, no distance. Just Noah and Allie. But laughter turns into frustration. Allie demands to know why he never wrote to her. Noah stares at her. Then he says he did, every day, for a year. 365 letters. Allie's smile disappears. She tells him she never received them. And suddenly the story both of them have lived with for years cracks apart. Noah thought she ignored him. Allie thought he abandoned her. Neither was true. Rain runs down their faces as anger, relief, grief, and love collide all at once. All those years, all that pain, all because the truth never reached them. Noah steps closer. He tells her it still isn't over. Allie looks at him like those words have struck somewhere she has spent years protecting. Then they kiss. Not carefully, not like two people remembering an old romance. They kiss like every unfinished sentence between them has finally found a voice. That night, the distance collapses completely. The house no longer feels like a monument to something dead. For one brief stretch of time, it becomes the life they once imagined. But morning brings reality back. Allie is still engaged. Lon is still waiting, and now guilt presses against the happiness she cannot deny. Then someone arrives at Noah's house. Allie's mother. Allie stiffens the moment she sees her. The same woman who once dragged her away from Noah has come to take her away again. Except this time, something is different. Her mother doesn't immediately order her home. Instead, she asks Allie to come for a drive. They stop near an industrial worksite, and Allie watches a laborer in the distance. Her mother's face changes. The polished certainty disappears. She tells Allie that before marrying her father, she once loved a man her own parents considered beneath her, poor, unsuitable, wrong for the life they had planned, so she left him. She chose security. She chose the acceptable future. And even after all these years, she sometimes comes here just to look at him. Allie stares at her mother, stunned. For the first time, she understands that the woman who fought hardest against Noah was not speaking from ignorance. She was speaking from regret. Then her mother reaches into her bag. A bundle of old envelopes appears in her hands. Allie recognizes Noah's handwriting. Her breath catches every missing letter, every unanswered year. Her mother had kept them. She gives the letters back and quietly tells Allie that whatever she chooses now, she has to live with that choice herself. Allie returns to Noah carrying the truth in her hands. But the truth does not make the decision easier, because she loves Noah, and she also cares deeply for Lon. Noah wants her to stay. Allie wants him to understand how impossible this feels. Their voices rise. Noah refuses to let fear make the decision for her, and Allie finally breaks. Because now nobody is keeping them apart. No parents, no missing letters, no war, only her, and this time she has to choose. Allie drives away from Noah with tears burning behind her eyes. He doesn't chase her. For once, there is nothing left he can do. The choice belongs to her. At the hotel, Lon is waiting. He already knows something is wrong. Allie's clothes, her face, the way she avoids his eyes. Everything tells him this trip was never simply about clearing her head. So Allie tells him the truth. She tells him about Noah, about the summer they shared, about the letters she never received, and finally, about what happened when she went back to that house. Lon's jaw tightens, but he doesn't explode. That almost makes it worse. He loves her. He has planned a life with her. And now he is standing in front of the woman he intends to marry, realizing that a part of her has always belonged somewhere else. Allie looks at him and sees everything she could have. Security, approval, a beautiful home, a husband her family would proudly welcome. With Lon, life would be easier. With Noah, nothing has ever been easy. That is exactly why the decision hurts. For years, Allie has allowed other people to tell her what kind of life she should want. Her parents told her Noah wasn't enough. Society told her Lon made sense. Time told her first love was something people eventually outgrew. But now nobody can decide for her. Not her mother, not Lon, not Noah, only Allie. And somewhere beneath all the noise, she finally hears herself. Lon watches her face change. He understands before she even says it. Allie removes the certainty from her future and chooses the man she never stopped loving. Back at the house, Noah is alone. The rain has passed. The rooms are quiet again. Everything he rebuilt suddenly feels painfully empty. Then a car approaches. Noah looks toward the road. Allie steps out. She doesn't need a long speech. She stayed. And this time, no one is taking her away. The years that separated them cannot be erased, but they no longer control what comes next. Noah and Allie begin the life that once seemed impossible. Not a perfect life. They still argue. They still push each other. They still carry the stubbornness that made their first summer so explosive. But they choose each other again and again. And then the story shifts. The young faces disappear. The old man closes the notebook. The woman sitting beside him has been listening closely, but confusion has returned to her eyes. We finally understand why he reads this particular story every day. The old man is Noah, and the woman beside him is Allie. Decades have passed. They married. They built a family. They had children. They lived a life hidden inside that White House. But time demanded a cruel price. Allie developed dementia. Her memories began disappearing piece by piece. Names faded. Faces blurred. Entire years vanished behind a fog she could not control. Before her illness became too severe, Allie wrote their story down in a notebook. She left no instructions. Read this to me. Maybe I'll come back. So Noah does, day after day. He lives in the same care facility, though he could be somewhere else, because leaving Allie alone is impossible for him. Sometimes she listens like the story belongs to strangers. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she becomes frightened because she doesn't recognize the man sitting inches away from her. And Noah absorbs every heartbreak quietly. Then one day, after he finishes reading, something changes. Allie looks at him differently. Her eyes sharpen. The fog lifts. She asks him a question that nearly stops his heart. How long do we have? Noah knows exactly what she means. The doctors have told him these moments of clarity never last. Maybe a few minutes, maybe less. But right now, Allie remembers. She remembers the carnival, the letters, the White House, their children, their life. Most importantly, she remembers him. Noah reaches for her hand. For one impossible moment, the disease loses. They are Noah and Allie again. Not patient and visitor, not two elderly strangers trapped inside a fading mind. Just the boy who refused to let go and the girl who came back. Then Noah notices something in Allie's eyes. Fear. Because she can feel the memory beginning to disappear again. Allie's fingers tighten around Noah's hand. She knows what is happening. A moment ago, she remembered everything. The summer, the house, the children, the man sitting in front of her. Now the edges are already beginning to blur. Noah, her voice trembles. He leans closer, trying to keep his own fear hidden. Allie asks whether their love can really create miracles. Noah answers without hesitation. Yes, because for him, this moment already is one. Then the fog returns. Allie looks at their joined hands as if she doesn't understand why he is touching her. Her breathing changes. Panic floods her face. She pulls away. Noah softly says her name, but now that name means nothing to her. She begins shouting. Nurses rush into the room. Noah tries to calm her, but the woman who remembered their entire life only seconds ago suddenly sees him as a stranger. Who are you? The words destroy him. Still, Noah doesn't fight. He steps back. He watches the nurses comfort the woman who once knew him better than anyone on earth. And once again, he loses Allie without actually losing her. That night, the pain catches up with him. Noah suffers a heart attack. He survives, but his children beg him to stop pushing himself so hard. They tell him he doesn't have to remain at the care home. They tell him their mother barely knows where she is anymore. But Noah already knows his answer. He stayed when Allie remembered him. He will stay when she doesn't. Because loving her was never only about the moments when love was returned perfectly. It was about choosing her through everything. Even this. After recovering, Noah returns to the facility. Late one night, he quietly walks through the dark hallway toward Allie's room. A nurse sees him. Visiting hours are over, and she knows he should not be there. She also knows exactly why he came, so she looks away. Noah enters. The room is almost completely dark. Allie lies beneath the blankets, asleep. He moves carefully toward her bed and sits beside her. For a second, he simply watches her breathe. This is the girl from the carnival. The young woman who danced with him in the street. The woman who broke his heart. The woman who came back. The mother of his children. The person whose memory may have forgotten their life, even though his never could. Then Allie opens her eyes. She looks at Noah. He waits. No expectations. No demands. Just hope. And somehow tonight she knows him. Her face softens. Noah? One word. That is enough. He smiles. Allie asks whether he thinks their love can take them away together. Noah lies beside her and takes her hand. He tells her he believes their love can do anything. No grand speech, no promises about tomorrow. They have already spent a lifetime proving what those promises mean. Allie settles beside him. Their hands remain intertwined. Outside the room, the building becomes silent. No arguments, no parents separating them, no war, no unanswered letters, no illness stealing another memory. Just Noah and Allie, together. By morning, a nurse enters the room. She stops. Noah and Allie are lying side by side in the bed, their hands still holding each other. Neither wakes. They have died peacefully during the night. For years. Noah had read from that notebook, hoping the story would bring Allie back for a few precious minutes. In the end, she came back one final time, and this time she didn't have to leave him again. The notebook had begun as a record of memories, a desperate way to preserve a love that disease was slowly erasing. But their love was never truly living on those pages. It lived in every letter Noah wrote when no answer came, in every board of the house he rebuilt, in Allie's decision to return, in the children they raised, in the old man who kept reading the same story even when the woman he loved could no longer recognize his face. Memory failed them. Time changed them. Life separated them more than once. But somehow, after every separation, Noah and Allie found their way back to each other. And when there was nowhere left to return to, they simply left together. The easiest way to misunderstand the notebook is to treat it as a movie built from romantic cliches. Rain-soaked kisses, letters, summer love, separation. A beautiful old house waiting for someone to come home. But Nick Cassavetes approached those familiar ingredients with one crucial belief. Sincerity matters more than sophistication. He wasn't trying to make romance look cooler than it is. He wanted love to feel embarrassing, irrational, physical, stubborn, and completely real to the people experiencing it. That philosophy became the film's secret weapon. 20 years later, Cassavetes openly defended its sentimentality, essentially arguing that love itself can be corny. So pretending otherwise would be dishonest. And Cassavetes was hardly the obvious filmmaker for something this unapologetically romantic. He was the son of legendary independent filmmaker John Cassavetes and actress Gina Rowlands, growing up around a filmmaking tradition obsessed with raw behavior rather than polished Hollywood emotion. Before The Notebook, Nick had directed Unhook the Stars, She's So Lovely, and the far more muscular social drama John Q. His filmmaking identity wasn't built around fairy tale romance. What he inherited from his family was something more useful, an interest in people when emotions stopped being neat. His mother had already starred in Unhook the Stars, and bringing her into The Notebook gave the production another deeply personal Cassavetes connection. The movie itself had been searching for a director long before Cassavetes finally took control. Nicholas Sparks's debut novel was optioned before its 1996 publication, and the project spent roughly 7 years moving through development, rewrites, and different filmmakers. Steven Spielberg had once been interested. Other directors became attached or were approached before the film finally reached Cassavetes. The funny part? He initially intended to reject it. Cassavetes later recalled reading the screenplay mainly so he could intelligently explain why he wasn't going to direct it. Then he reached the end. Instead of dismissing the material, he found himself laughing at the realization that he had been trapped by his own emotional response. He wanted in. That reaction tells you almost everything about his eventual direction. Cassavetes understood that The Notebook would fail the instant it became embarrassed by itself. So the film never winks at Noah and Allie's intensity. It doesn't stand outside their relationship telling us how ridiculous young love can be. It climbs inside it. Arguments become enormous because, When you are that age and that consumed by somebody, they are enormous. A summer feels endless. A breakup feels terminal. Years apart somehow fail to kill what common sense says should already be dead. Cassavetes lets the characters believe all of it completely, and that commitment gives the melodrama weight. He also made a choice that would shape the entire movie. Authenticity mattered more than conventional movie star perfection. Cassavetes later explained that he didn't want viewers watching an established romantic leading man and thinking, here he goes falling in love again. Ryan Gosling was still far from the global star he would become, while Rachel McAdams was only beginning her major Hollywood breakthrough. Their relative freshness meant Noah and Allie could arrive without decades of romantic screen baggage attached to them. Cassavetes wanted audiences to see two people, not two celebrities performing another studio romance. That instinct fits the larger Cassavetes filmmaking tradition beautifully. John Cassavetes' cinema often found truth in emotional disorder. People interrupting each other, contradicting themselves, behaving badly, loving badly. The Notebook is far more classical and commercially polished than his father's independent films, but traces of that philosophy remain. Noah and Allie don't communicate like idealized lovers. They fight, they shout, they tease each other. Attraction sits beside irritation. Watch their strongest scenes and the romance rarely feels serene. It feels unstable, almost combustible. That messiness keeps the movie from turning into nothing but beautifully photographed nostalgia. Casting Gina Rowlands as the older Allie pushed that emotional philosophy even deeper. Dementia wasn't an abstract dramatic device for the Cassavetes family. Rowland's own mother had experienced the disease, and Nick later said he and Gina spent considerable time discussing how to portray it authentically. That knowledge changes the temperature of the nursing home material. The film may be designed to make audiences cry, but those scenes aren't powered only by manipulation. There is lived fear underneath them, the terrifying possibility that love can remain while the memory of having loved disappears. That is ultimately Cassavetes' defining contribution to The Notebook. He took material Hollywood could easily have turned into decorative sentiment and directed it as though every oversized emotion deserved respect. No apology, no ironic distance. Just people loving each other with embarrassing intensity while time quietly waits to take everything away. The movie's reputation would eventually grow far beyond its initially mixed critical reception, but the foundation was established right here. A director willing to believe wholeheartedly in a story other filmmakers might have been tempted to soften with cynicism. And once that emotional philosophy was established, the next challenge was even harder, transforming Nicholas Sparks's novel into a screenplay capable of carrying two timelines, decades of longing, and one enormous romantic payoff without collapsing under its own sentiment. The analytical structure and conversational film critic voice used here follow the supplied training framework. But a director can only amplify what the screenplay gives him, and The Notebook presented an unusually delicate adaptation problem. Nicholas Sparks' 1996 novel wasn't simply a story about two attractive young people falling desperately in love. Its emotional engine was memory itself. An elderly man holding onto a relationship that the woman he loves can no longer reliably remember. New Line acquired the film rights in 1996, with Jeremy Levin brought in to write the screenplay and John Sardi later credited for adaptation work. The project then spent years moving through rewrites and different potential directors before Nick Cassavetes finally took over. The smartest choice Levin and Sardi made was refusing to treat the older Noah and Allie as a decorative framing device. The Notebook isn't just a convenient excuse to flash back. It creates dramatic irony. We are watching young Noah and Allie behave as though their summer will last forever, while another timeline quietly reminds us that nothing does. Bodies age. Memory deteriorates. Time wins eventually. Sparks' novel likewise centers the Notebook and the older couple, while following Noah after World War II and his reunion with Allie. The film preserves that central architecture while making the youthful romance far more immediate and cinematic. And that shift matters. A novel can live comfortably inside recollection. A movie needs behavior. So the screenplay gives young Noah and Allie movement, conflict, flirtation, and physical spaces where their attraction can become visible. The carnival, the empty street, the abandoned house, the lake, the rain. These locations aren't simply romantic scenery. They become emotional landmarks. The relationship progresses through places the audience can remember. Instead of being told that these two people once shared an extraordinary summer, we experience the chaos of it. They laugh, fight, provoke each other, separate, reconnect. Their romance becomes less like remembered information and more like lived experience. The writing is also much sharper when Noah and Allie are allowed to be irritating. That's crucial. Their famous arguments work because the screenplay understands that passion and incompatibility can occupy the same room. Noah is persistent to the point of recklessness. Allie is impulsive, privileged, fiery, and uncertain about what she actually wants. Their conversations frequently operate like emotional wrestling matches, affection turning into anger, anger turning into attraction, sometimes within seconds. Romantic dramas often make the mistake of creating lovers who agree too easily. The Notebook does the opposite. Conflict becomes proof that these characters matter to each other, because indifference would be much quieter. Then comes the screenplay's most effective structural trick, delaying full confirmation of Duke's identity. Audiences can certainly suspect that James Garner's storyteller is the older Noah, but the film doesn't immediately announce it. Jeremy Levin has specifically discussed The Notebook when explaining how a screenwriter should prepare a reveal, placing enough information for the truth to feel earned without making the audience feel deliberately deceived. That's exactly why the nursing home storyline works. The question gradually stops being, who are these elderly people? And becomes something more painful. Will she remember him this time? The letters are another beautifully simple piece of screenwriting, because they turn absence into something physical. Noah writing every day for a year could have been reduced to exposition. Instead, those letters become evidence of a relationship Allie never knew was still being fought for. Her mother intercepting them transforms the class conflict from parental disapproval into active interference, and when those letters finally return to Allie, the story effectively hands her the missing years of her own emotional history. The device is melodramatic, absolutely. But melodrama works when an object carries genuine dramatic consequence. And here a stack of paper contains an entire alternate life. The film also makes its most aggressive adaptation choice at the ending. Sparks' novel does not conclude with Noah and Allie dying together. The book leaves them alive after a moment of renewed intimacy, whereas the film pushes the romance toward absolute finality. They are discovered together after dying peacefully in bed. Subtle? Not remotely? Effective? For this movie, yes. Cassavetes and the screenplay spend 2 hours arguing that love can survive class division, war, separation, aging, and dementia. Ending with death itself, becoming the final shared experience, completes that argument with almost mythic simplicity. That's why the screenplay survives its cliches. It doesn't avoid familiar romantic devices. It organizes them around one increasingly painful idea. The person beside you can become the keeper of a life you can no longer remember. Suddenly the carnival, the letters, the house, and even those explosive arguments aren't just romantic memories. They're evidence. Proof that this life happened. Proof that these people chose each other. But words alone couldn't make audiences believe that choice. The entire emotional structure depended on finding two young actors capable of turning scripted passion into something that felt dangerously spontaneous. And the search for Noah and Allie became almost as fascinating as the romance itself. If The Notebook had been cast with two already established romantic superstars, it might have become a completely different movie. Nick Cassavetes understood that danger. He wanted Noah and Allie to feel discovered rather than manufactured. Two people we could believe were falling in love for the first time, not celebrities repeating chemistry audiences had already watched in 5 other films. Ryan Gosling was chosen relatively early, while the search for Allie became far more competitive. Cassavetes later explained that part of Gosling's appeal was his slightly unconventional quality. Noah needed someone intense enough to convince us that one meeting could reorganize his entire emotional life. That choice becomes more fascinating when you consider who might have played Noah instead. Tom Cruise and George Clooney were among the names considered during the project's long development history. Both were already major stars. Both could obviously carry a romantic drama. But Cassavetes eventually articulated the problem with that approach. He didn't want audiences watching another famous leading man perform another familiar screen romance. He wanted discovery. Gosling, still years away from Drive, La La Land, and Barbie, brought something less polished. His Noah could be charming, but there was also something restless underneath him. He looked capable of building a house for a woman, and equally capable of spending years obsessing over why she disappeared. Finding Allie was harder. Casting director Matthew Barry and Cassavetes looked at dozens of actresses, eventually testing 10 women opposite Gosling. According to Cassavetes, 9 were already well known. Britney Spears reached the final stages. Jessica Biel auditioned. Reese Witherspoon was considered early in the process, and several other recognizable young actresses entered the conversation. This wasn't a small romantic role waiting for an unknown performer. It was one of those Hollywood parts everybody could recognize as potentially career-changing. And then Rachel McAdams walked into the room. Her audition is almost a miniature version of why her performance works. McAdams read the confrontation in which Allie tells Noah she is going back to Lon, with Gosling reading opposite her off-camera. Cassavetes remembered the decision becoming obvious once she performed. That's the key word, obvious. Not because McAdams looked exactly like some idealized Southern heiress, but because she could change emotional direction without making the gears visible. Anger becomes vulnerability. Certainty cracks into hesitation. She can attack Noah verbally while simultaneously looking terrified that walking away from him might destroy her. Those contradictions are Allie. Without them, the character becomes nothing more than the woman caught between two men. Britney Spears makes the casting story even more interesting because she apparently wasn't some celebrity audition thrown into the process for publicity. Barry has described her test as extremely strong, and the role ultimately came down to Spears and McAdams. Think about how radically that alternate version changes the movie. Spears was one of the most recognizable pop stars on Earth. Every expression would arrive carrying the audience's knowledge of Britney Spears. McAdams had the opposite advantage. Viewers could meet Allie before they formed a fixed idea of Rachel McAdams. Cassavetes had wanted authenticity rather than star recognition, and choosing the less famous actress supported that philosophy almost perfectly. Then there is Gosling and McAdams together, which is where casting stops being about resumes and starts becoming chemistry. And their chemistry isn't soft. That's what people often forget. Noah and Allie don't spend the entire movie gazing beautifully into each other's eyes. They challenge each other. Their rhythm has friction. Gosling plays Noah as emotionally direct, sometimes almost dangerously certain about what he wants. McAdams gives Allie a much more volatile interior, as if desire, obligation, anger, and fear are all arriving at once. Put those energies together, and every romantic scene gains instability. You believe they could kiss. You also believe they could start screaming 30 seconds later. Ironically, the actors themselves reportedly had serious friction during production. Cassavetes revealed years later that Gosling and McAdams struggled with each other at one point, even describing an intense confrontation on set, although he later regretted making that story public and apologized for revealing it. They eventually became romantically involved after the film, dating from 2005 to 2007. But the behind-the-scenes history matters less than the result on screen. Whatever their personal dynamic was, Cassavetes had cast 2 performers who refused to make the relationship comfortable. The sparks don't feel decorative. They feel dangerous, and Cassavetes surrounded them with performers who changed the emotional weight of the story. James Garner gives older Noah a weathered steadiness that Gosling's younger version hasn't earned yet. Gina Rowlands, Cassavetes' own mother, brings decades of screen experience to older Allie. Joan Allen makes Allie's mother more complicated than the standard wealthy parent blocking true love, while Sam Shepard gives Noah's father an understated warmth. James Marsden faces perhaps the most thankless assignment of all as Lon. He has to be good enough that Allie's decision becomes painful. If Lon were cruel or obviously wrong for her, there would be no real choice. That's what makes the ensemble construction so effective. The casting doesn't merely ask who looks romantic together. Every choice increases the pressure on Noah and Allie's relationship. Gosling gives Noah obsession. McAdams gives Allie contradiction. Marsden gives her an appealing alternative. Allen gives her social expectation. Garner and Rowlands give the youthful romance consequence, proof that these impulsive young people will eventually become old people carrying the emotional cost of every decision. Cassavetes found the faces. But faces alone don't make the Notebook endure. What happens when the camera stays close enough to catch Noah's desperation, Allie's hesitation, and the tiny moments when both actors stop appearing to perform at all? That's where Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams turn casting potential into the emotional engine of the entire film. Casting gave the Notebook its faces, but performance gave it its pulse. Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams are remembered for the rain-soaked reunion, yet their real achievement happens much earlier, when Noah and Allie are still irritating each other. Gosling doesn't introduce Noah as a polished romantic hero. He makes him cocky, impulsive, awkwardly intense. McAdams answers with resistance instead of instant surrender. Her Allie laughs loudly, snaps back, changes moods without warning. That friction matters because the romance never begins in emotional safety. It begins as collision. Nick Cassavetes and Nicholas Sparks have both credited the two leads as central to why the finished film ultimately worked, and you can feel why. Neither actor plays young love as calm or mature. Gosling's physical preparation helped establish Noah's working-class texture. Before filming, he spent time in Charleston, reportedly rowing on the Ashley River and making furniture, including pieces connected to the production. Watch what that gives the performance. Noah rarely seems decorative inside his own environment. His shoulders hang differently when he's working. His hands belong around lumber, tools, and machinery. Even after the character becomes emotionally wrecked by separation, Gosling doesn't suddenly turn him into a poetic suffering hero. He becomes quieter, harder. When Noah restores the Windsor plantation house, Gosling plays the obsession less like a grand romantic gesture than a man trying to convert emotional paralysis into physical labor. He can't rebuild the relationship, so he rebuilds the house. That restraint becomes Gosling's strongest weapon. Noah talks aplenty when he's young, but some of his best acting arrives when dialogue disappears. After the separation, his face seems to close. The playful smile from the summer sequences becomes rarer, and his body carries an almost exhausted stillness. Gosling was already associated with darker, more inward performances before The Notebook, which makes his casting especially effective. Beneath Noah's romantic persistence, he allows a trace of fixation that keeps the character from becoming too clean. Even the famous Ferris wheel introduction contains that edge. Noah's behavior is intentionally extreme and can feel uncomfortable rather than charming if viewed outside the movie's romantic framing. Gosling doesn't completely erase that discomfort. He uses it to establish a man whose greatest strength and greatest flaw are basically the same thing. Once Noah wants something, letting go is almost impossible. McAdams has the more difficult emotional assignment because Allie must change direction constantly without seeming inconsistent. She can be ecstatic with Noah in one scene and furious with him in the next. Years later, she has to appear genuinely capable of marrying Lon while making us believe Noah still occupies some unresolved corner of her identity. Her preparation reportedly included time in Charleston along with etiquette, ballet, and dialect work appropriate to Allie's social world. But the technical preparation isn't what makes the performance memorable. It's her responsiveness. McAdams listens with her entire face. When another character says something Allie doesn't want to hear, you often see the reaction arrive before she answers. Eyes tightening, breath shifting, confidence disappearing for half a second. Tiny fractures. Then the social mask returns. Her audition already contained that quality. McAdams had only a very short period with the material before reading for the role, yet Cassavetes recalled that once she performed, the choice became apparent. That instinct survives into the finished movie, especially during Allie's confrontations with Noah. McAdams doesn't treat anger as one emotion. Sometimes Allie's anger is embarrassment. Sometimes it's desire with nowhere safe to go. Sometimes she's furious because Noah understands what she wants before she's ready to admit it herself. That distinction becomes crucial during the reunion material. The scene works because she isn't simply choosing between two men. She's choosing between two versions of herself, the socially coherent life she has built and the messier life Noah represents. Then comes the rain scene, the moment that swallowed the rest of the movie culturally. Strip away the weather, the swelling romance, the clothes clinging to bodies, and what remains is actually an argument about lost time. Noah tells Allie he wrote to her. She realizes the separation she had interpreted as abandonment wasn't what she thought. Gosling plays the revelation with frustration that has been fermenting for years. McAdams responds first with disbelief, then anger, then emotional surrender. The kiss lands because the actors make us experience several emotions before it: hurt, accusation, recognition, desire. The physical passion gets remembered, but the performance works because resentment arrives first. Their most revealing scene, though, may be the later confrontation built around Noah demanding that Allie identify what she wants. Gosling pushes rather than comforts. McAdams practically folds under the question because Allie's entire upbringing has trained her to think in terms of expectations: family, class, reputation, security. Here the actors reverse their usual energies. Noah becomes still and direct. Allie becomes physically scattered, looking for an answer she genuinely doesn't possess. McAdams lets panic enter the performance without turning the scene into hysteria. Gosling, meanwhile, keeps Noah's desperation underneath the insistence. He's demanding clarity from her because he needs it too. The dialogue is simple. The subtext isn't. And their chemistry becomes even stranger when you know the production wasn't consistently harmonious. Cassavetes later revealed that the two actors clashed badly during filming and once needed to air out their frustrations away from the larger set. Years afterward, he said he regretted publicly sharing that story. The temptation is to romanticize the conflict and claim that real irritation somehow created great chemistry. That's too easy. Actors don't need to dislike each other to create passion. What matters is that Gosling and McAdams remained fully reactive to one another on camera. Neither performer retreats into a predetermined version of the scene. They push, interrupt, challenge, soften. Their chemistry feels active rather than posed. McAdams ultimately carries the greater range. Gosling gives the film its obsessive romantic center, but Allie must be daughter, lover, fiancée, rebel, and frightened young woman, sometimes within the same stretch of screen time. She also has to make Lon believable as an actual possibility. If she looked emotionally dead whenever James Marsden entered the frame, the love triangle would collapse immediately. Instead, McAdams allows warmth with Lon. She doesn't play him as a mistake. That choice makes returning to Noah cost something. And that's where her performance earns the movie's melodrama. Allie isn't escaping a terrible life. She's abandoning a potentially good one because it isn't the life she can fully inhabit. Together, Gosling and McAdams make The Notebook work by refusing to play love as a permanent state of bliss. Their version is physical, selfish, tender, exhausting, and sometimes unfair. That's why the iconic scenes survive after the romantic imagery has become familiar. You aren't remembering two perfectly compatible people. You're remembering two people who seem incapable of remaining emotionally neutral around each other. But a romance this intense needs resistance from more than its lovers. And the film's supporting performers provide exactly that. Parents, rivals, fathers, and older selves who turn Noah and Allie's private passion into a much larger emotional world. Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams create the fire, but The Notebook would become exhausting if everyone around them existed only to admire or obstruct that fire. The supporting cast gives the romance perspective. James Garner shows what Noah's intensity becomes after decades of devotion. Gina Rowlands turns Allie's memory loss into something frighteningly human. Joan Allen gives parental opposition an emotional history of its own. Sam Shepard provides Noah with the kind of quiet acceptance Allie never receives at home. And James Marsden performs perhaps the hardest job in the entire ensemble. making the man Allie doesn't choose genuinely worth choosing. Those performances stop the movie from becoming a two-person fantasy and make love feel connected to family, aging, regret, and consequence. James Garner's older Noah is especially clever casting because he doesn't imitate Ryan Gosling. He shouldn't. Decades have passed. The volatility has burned away. Garner instead gives us the emotional residue of the younger man. The persistence remains, but it has hardened into patience. His scenes with Rollins are filled with small acts, reading, watching, waiting, recognizing when he has pushed too far. The performance earned Garner a Screen Actors Guild nomination for supporting actor, and the recognition makes sense. His most affecting moments aren't declarations of love. They are the moments when hope briefly appears in his eyes and then disappears because Allie has slipped away from him again. Young Noah fights to get Allie. Older Noah fights simply to reach her. Then Gina Rollins takes that tragedy somewhere deeper. Casting her had enormous personal resonance. She was Nick Cassavetes' mother, and Rollins had already experienced Alzheimer's through her own mother. She later said the role was especially difficult for precisely that reason, and that she might not have accepted it had her son not been directing. That history never needs to be explained inside the film because Rollins communicates the fear physically. Older Allie can appear socially composed and almost playful, then suddenly lose the emotional map of the room. The shift is brutal. Her face asks a question before her dialogue does. Who are you, and why are you looking at me like I should know? Rollins also avoids making the illness one continuous state of confusion. That's what gives the brief moments of recognition their power. When Allie returns, when memory reconnects her with Noah, the performance seems to physically reorganize itself. Her gaze becomes focused. Her voice changes. The woman who has spent scenes responding to Duke as a kindly stranger suddenly looks at the same man with decades behind her eyes. Cassavetes later recalled that studio executives wanted more visible emotion during one such moment, leading to a reshoot. Despite being unhappy about the note, Rollins produced the required tears immediately. Professional precision hiding inside overwhelming emotion. Very Gina Rollins. Joan Allen has a less sympathetic assignment as Anne Hamilton, but reducing her to the rich mother who separates the lovers misses what Allen does. Early on, she is controlled, judgmental, almost frighteningly certain that Noah represents the wrong future for her daughter. Allen rarely needs theatrical cruelty. Her posture does the policing. Her measured voice tells you Allie comes from a world where emotion is acceptable only when it remains socially manageable. Then the film cracks Anne open. She reveals that she once loved a working-class man herself and still occasionally watches him from a distance. Suddenly, her opposition to Noah doesn't look like simple snobbery. It looks like someone forcing her daughter toward the compromise she once forced upon herself. That revelation changes Allen's entire performance retroactively. Anne recognizes exactly what Allie feels, which is why she fears it. She has already survived the version of this story where duty wins. When she finally returns Noah's hidden letters to her daughter, Allen doesn't transform Anne into a sentimental ally. There's regret in the gesture, but also resignation. She knows she can advise Allie. She cannot make the choice for her. And for a film that sometimes deals in enormous emotions, Allen's understatement is valuable. She lets regret whisper. Sam Shepard brings an entirely different energy as Noah's father, Frank. He isn't given a huge dramatic arc, yet Shepard makes the Calhoun home feel emotionally safe. Frank jokes with Allie, respects Noah's decisions, sells his own house so Noah can pursue the restoration project, and never treats his son's love as something requiring social approval. The contrast with Allie's family is quietly enormous. Her world offers material comfort and emotional restriction. Noah's world has less money but more room to breathe. Shepard makes that contrast believable without turning Frank into a saint. He simply plays him as a father comfortable with affection. And then there's James Marsden, poor Lon. Romantic films frequently cheat by making the alternative partner arrogant, dishonest, or boring, so the audience never has to confront the morality of abandoning him. The Notebook refuses that escape. Lon is handsome, successful, affectionate, socially acceptable. And he genuinely loves Allie. Marsden plays him without villainy. That generosity strengthens Noah rather than weakening him, because Allie cannot justify leaving Lon by discovering some hidden defect. Even Marsden has since acknowledged that Noah and Allie's chemistry makes their eventual pairing understandable. That is the ensemble's real accomplishment. Nobody simply fills space around the central couple. Garner embodies endurance. Rowlands embodies memory's fragility. Allen embodies regret and inherited expectation. Shepard represents emotional freedom. Marsden represents the perfectly reasonable life Allie must reject if she chooses passion instead. Together, they make Noah and Allie's romance larger than chemistry. And surrounding all of those people is another silent performer, the world they inhabit. The decaying plantation house, Allie's immaculate family surroundings, vintage clothing, sun-faded porches, old streets, and that almost impossibly romantic lake don't merely establish the 1940s. They visualize the difference between the life Allie is expected to live and the one Noah builds with his own hands. Before Noah says almost anything about the future he wants with Allie, he describes a house, white walls, blue shutters, a room overlooking the river, a porch where she can paint. That detail tells you how seriously the notebook treats physical space. Buildings aren't background decoration here. They become containers for memory and desire. Production designer Sarah Knowles was responsible for shaping that world. While much of the film was shot around Charleston and the South Carolina Lowcountry, rather than the North Carolina setting associated with Nicholas Sparks's story, the result is a movie where geography feels almost as romantic as the people inhabiting it. Nothing carries that idea more powerfully than Noah's house. The exterior belonged to a real 19th century residence at Martin's Point on Wadmalaw Island. Instead of discovering an authentically ruined building and restoring it during production, the filmmakers essentially worked backward. The existing house was distressed to appear neglected, then presented in progressively restored condition as Noah rebuilds it. That's a wonderfully practical piece of filmmaking because the house itself becomes a character arc. When Noah first shows it to Allie, it's possibility. When he returns alone and begins rebuilding, it's grief-given architecture. By the time Allie sees the completed White House in the newspaper, the building has become something stranger, a love letter large enough to live inside. And notice what Noah does with heartbreak. He doesn't write poetry about it forever. He builds. Window by window, wall by wall. He turns memory into carpentry. The restoration, therefore, works on two levels at once. On the surface, it fulfills the promise he made during their summer together. Underneath, it's almost obsessive. Noah isn't simply improving property. He's reconstructing the future that disappeared when Allie left. That's why the house feels beautiful and slightly haunted at the same time. Every finished room contains an absent person. Production design rarely gets a more literal emotional function than that. Allie's family world is built on the opposite visual principle. The exterior of the Hamilton family's summer residence was filmed at Boone Hall Plantation, while interiors used another Grand Charleston property, now known as the Williams Mansion. Those spaces are elegant, ordered, expansive, and strangely restrictive. Everything looks expensive enough to imply rules. Noah's environments feel worn, open, and physically connected to labor. Allie's environments feel polished, inherited, and socially controlled. The film doesn't need Anne Hamilton to explain class difference every 5 minutes because the walls have already explained it. You can practically measure the distance between Noah and Allie through furniture. Then there are the locations that escape both worlds. Their movie date uses Charleston's American Theater, while the unforgettable rowing sequence was filmed at Cypress Gardens, whose Blackwater swamp and cypress landscape have become inseparable from the film's imagery. That lake sequence is romantic partly because it seems detached from ordinary society. No parents, no fiancé, no class expectations. For a few minutes, Noah and Allie disappear into water, trees, and birds, as though nature has sealed them inside a private memory. It's almost unreal, which makes the thunderstorm that follows feel like the world violently rushing back in. Costume designer Karen Wagner accomplishes the same class storytelling through clothing. Wagner later said she created roughly 90% of the film's costumes rather than relying primarily on rentals. because she wanted wardrobe to carry specific narrative information. Allie's early clothes are structured, coordinated, and visibly connected to money. Even when she's behaving recklessly, she's dressed like someone whose future has already been planned. Noah's wardrobe is simpler and more functional. Shirts are lived in rather than displayed. Trousers feel connected to work. The difference isn't merely rich girl, poor boy. It's control versus freedom expressed through fabric. Allie's famous blue reunion dress might be the best example. Wagner traced its visual inspiration partly to the color relationships in a JMW Turner painting and deliberately made the dress simpler than much of Allie's more sophisticated wardrobe. She wanted it to feel hopeful and to let Noah see Allie rather than the clothes announcing her social position first. That's exactly how it plays. When Allie returns to Noah, the costume doesn't make her look like the carefully arranged daughter from the Hamilton household. The silhouette is softer. The color blends naturally with the landscape. Visually, she's moving away from the life chosen for her before she has consciously admitted that's what she's doing. Her wedding gown operates in the opposite direction. Wagner drew inspiration from the culturally familiar image of Grace Kelly's royal wedding and used the amount of lace, the enormous veil, and the gown's formality to emphasize the Hamilton family's wealth. She even wanted the costume to create a sense of physical discomfort for Allie during the sequence in which Noah's newspaper photograph re-enters her life. Look at the irony. Allie is wearing the costume that should represent the completion of her socially perfect future, yet she looks trapped inside it. The dress is gorgeous. That's exactly why it works. A prison wouldn't be tempting if it looked like one. This is where the Notebook's visual craftsmanship becomes smarter than its reputation for glossy romance suggests. Its most attractive objects often contain conflict. The restored house represents devotion, but also obsession. The Hamilton estate represents security, but also restriction. The wedding dress represents privilege, but also a life Allie isn't sure she can inhabit. Even the lake's impossible beauty exists moments before an emotional explosion. Pretty pictures aren't interrupting the storytelling. They are the storytelling. And Sarah Noel's production design and Karen Wagner's costumes only establish what occupies the frame. The next question is how that frame itself behaves, why the golden light feels like memory, why rain transforms a confrontation into mythology, and how cinematographer Robert Frias gives the Notebook the visual texture of something remembered more beautifully than it may actually have happened. If the production design builds the Notebook's memories, Robert Frias's cinematography decides how we remember them. Frias was already an accomplished cinematographer before working with Nick Cassavetes, with credits ranging from The Lover, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, to Ronin and Enemy at the Gates. That background matters because the Notebook asks for something almost opposite to those harder-edged films. Instead of making danger feel immediate, Frias has to make the past feel emotionally irresistible. Roger Ebert singled out his photography for its rich, saturated quality, pointing to images ranging from birds at sunset to candlelit interiors. Technically, the film was photographed on 35mm using a Moviecam compact with Kodak-style express lenses and presented in the wide 2.39:1 aspect ratio. That wide frame gives Cassavetes and Frias room to do something essential: place romance inside landscape. Noah and Allie aren't constantly isolated in tight close-ups. They're allowed to exist against enormous trees, open roads, sprawling houses, and stretches of water. The environment becomes part of the feeling. When they're happy, the world seems almost impossibly spacious. When they're separated, that same space can make them look small. The frame doesn't merely contain their relationship, it measures it. Look at the opening imagery: water, a distant rower, birds cutting across a glowing sky. The movie begins almost like a memory before we even understand whose memory we're entering. Frias doesn't photograph the landscape with documentary neutrality. The colors are heightened, the silhouettes clean, the sunset almost too beautiful to be accidental. That's the point. The Notebook isn't showing us the past as objective history. Much of what we see is a story being read aloud, remembered through decades of love and loss. So the slight visual idealization makes psychological sense. Memories often don't preserve fluorescent lights and ugly afternoons. They preserve sunsets. The youthful sequences consistently benefit from that warmth. Skin catches soft light. Summer greenery feels dense. Exterior scenes breathe. Even interiors often carry an inviting glow rather than clinical brightness. Yet Frace avoids making every romantic moment look identical. The abandoned house scenes, for instance, use darkness and practical-looking pools of illumination to turn an empty structure into something private and slightly dangerous. When Noah and Allie enter it as teenagers, the house feels unfinished because they are unfinished. Years later, when Noah restores it, daylight fills a space that once existed mostly as fantasy. The architecture has changed, but so has the emotional lighting around it. Then consider the lake sequence at Cypress Gardens, one of the movie's most recognizable visual passages. The location was among the South Carolina sites used for filming, with trained birds incorporated into the sequence. Frass composes Noah and Allie against water, trees and flocks of white birds until the scene almost stops looking realistic. It's romantic excess rendered with complete confidence. But the beauty serves a structural purpose. This is the calm before emotional violence. Their conversation begins reopening the past, then the weather shifts, and the carefully peaceful image starts falling apart. Nature doesn't simply decorate the reunion, it tracks it. Which brings us to the rain. Everybody remembers the kiss, but watch what the cinematography does before the kiss happens. The soft serenity of the lake disappears. Visibility drops. Clothing darkens. Hair sticks to faces. The actors stop looking arranged. Rain creates texture everywhere, catching light while flattening the distance between Noah and Allie. Instead of maintaining the polished beauty associated with the earlier reunion, the sequence gradually strips them down visually. By the time Noah admits that he wrote to her, the frame feels less like nostalgic romance and more like emotional exposure. Then they kiss, and the image becomes iconic precisely because elegance and chaos arrive together. Frass also understands when not to make the camera call attention to itself. The Notebook isn't constructed around elaborate tracking shots or flashy visual puzzles. Most of its strongest scenes prioritize faces and spatial relationships. During arguments, the camera often lets Gosling and McAdams generate the movement themselves. They walk away, turn back, close distance, retreat again. The cinematography observes those changes instead of overpowering them. That restraint is crucial. A romance this emotionally loud doesn't need a camera screaming for attention, too. The older timeline changes the visual temperature. The nursing home material feels more controlled, quieter, and less intoxicated by sunlight. Rooms become contained spaces rather than endless summer landscapes. The contrast isn't so extreme that the film looks divided into two unrelated visual styles, but you feel the shift. Youth happens outside, in streets, lakes, porches, fields, unfinished houses. Old age increasingly happens inside. Windows replace horizons. Corridors replace roads. It creates a visual progression from possibility toward limitation without requiring anybody to explain it. And that wide 2.391 frame becomes unexpectedly poignant here. Early in the film, width means freedom. Noah and Allie can run through it. Later, space becomes something separating people. Older Noah can sit only a few feet from Allie and still be emotionally unreachable because dementia has created a distance no lens can collapse. Frace's cinematography keeps returning us to that contradiction. Physical closeness doesn't guarantee emotional access. That's why The Notebook looks prettier than realism and still feels emotionally truthful. Frass isn't photographing love exactly as it happens. He's photographing the way love survives inside memory, golden, selective, heightened, with certain moments enlarged until they become mythology. The sunset, the lake, the White House, the rain. Individual images become emotional shorthand for an entire relationship. But images can only carry half of that memory. Close your eyes during the film's most emotional moments, and another force is doing just as much work. Aaron Zigman's piano themes, period songs, rainfall, silence, and the almost invisible soundscape that tells us what to feel before the characters can put it into words. What the camera romanticizes, Aaron Zigman's music makes intimate. His score doesn't try to overwhelm The Notebook with enormous orchestral declarations every time Noah looks at Allie. Its most recognizable musical language is much simpler: piano, restrained strings, melodies that seem to hesitate before resolving. Zygmunt had already collaborated with Nick Cassavetes on John Q, and he later explained that he connected personally with the Notebook's longing for love and family. That emotional identification matters. The score doesn't sound like someone commenting on romance from outside. It sounds like someone remembering it. Listen to the main title. The piano doesn't announce itself with some huge romantic theme. Notes arrive gently, surrounded by space, while the orchestration gradually gives them emotional weight. The soundtrack also contains cues titled Allie Returns, Noah's Journey, On the Lake, Noah's Last Letter, and Our Love Can Do Miracles, People, titles that reveal how closely Zygmunt's score follows emotional turning points rather than existing as detached background music. The melody keeps returning in different emotional conditions, which is exactly what memory does. Same feeling, different age, different meaning. Piano is particularly effective because the Notebook is fundamentally a story about intimacy rather than scale. Noah and Allie may experience their romance as the most important event in human history. Young lovers generally do, but the score keeps bringing everything back to something personal. A piano sounds as though one person could be sitting alone in a room playing it. That quality fits Noah perfectly. His love frequently becomes solitary, writing letters that receive no answers, rebuilding an empty house, waiting beside an older Allie who may not recognize him. Zygmunt's music gives those moments tenderness without pretending the loneliness isn't there. The period songs create another layer entirely. The official soundtrack places Zygmunt's score beside recordings associated with Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Glenn Miller. This does more than stamp 1940s onto the movie. Those songs make young Noah and Allie's world feel socially alive. Music comes from dances, radios, and public spaces. It belongs to the era around them. Zygmunt's score, by contrast, belongs more privately to the lovers. One type of music tells us when they are. The other tells us what the memory of being there feels like. I'll Be Seeing You is almost suspiciously perfect for this story. The soundtrack includes the song alongside Zygmunt's original material, and even its title echoes the film's obsession with absence and return. The Notebook keeps separating people while insisting emotionally that separation is never complete. Noah writes to someone who isn't there. Allie carries feelings she tries to bury. Older Noah reads a story, hoping the woman sitting beside him will somehow come back. The music turns remembrance into something audible. You can leave a room. You can disappear for years. Memory keeps playing the song. But sound is most effective when the movie allows music to compete with something less controlled. Rain is the obvious example. During the reunion confrontation, the weather isn't gentle romantic ambience. It pounds around Noah and Allie. Their voices have to exist inside it. Clothes become soaked, movement becomes clumsy, and the polished atmosphere of their lake trip collapses into noise. That sonic mess is essential. If Zygmunt's orchestra simply swelled over every word, the scene could feel manufactured. Instead, environmental sound helps the argument remain physical before the romantic payoff takes over. The world sounds as emotionally disordered as the characters look. Silence becomes even more important in the older timeline. The nursing home sequences depend on pauses. Noah waiting for recognition, Allie trying to locate something inside herself, a conversation suddenly losing its emotional continuity. These gaps hurt because the film has conditioned us to associate their younger relationship with movement. Arguments, laughter, music, storms. Aging changes the rhythm. Now Noah can do everything correctly and receive nothing back. Sound disappears where certainty used to live. The quiet isn't empty. It becomes the space dementia places between two people sitting inches apart. That is why Zygmunt's score works despite being openly sentimental. It never pretends the Notebook is emotionally restrained material. A more ironic score would belong to a different film. Zygmunt gives Cassavetes exactly what his directing philosophy requires: sincerity without apology. The piano remembers. The strings ache. Period music preserves an era. Rain destroys composure. Silence reminds us that memory can vanish, while love remains stubbornly present. The soundtrack album itself preserves that mixture. combining original score cues with period recordings rather than separating the two musical worlds, and creating all of that emotion on screen was considerably less effortless than the finished movie makes it appear. Behind the summer glow were long development years, demanding South Carolina conditions, trained birds, difficult actor dynamics, practical location problems, and one famous rain sequence that required far more machinery and patience than its apparent spontaneity suggests. The romance may feel destined. The production absolutely wasn't. The finished Notebook looks effortless. Warm sunlight, empty roads, perfect rain, birds gliding across still water, two lovers somehow arriving at exactly the right emotional moment. Production was considerably less romantic. The film had already spent roughly 7 years moving through development before Nick Cassavetes finally took control, surviving rewrites and changing directors along the way. That long gestation makes the finished movie's simplicity almost deceptive. Behind a story designed to feel inevitable was a production constantly engineering inevitability, finding the right locations, controlling weather, transforming buildings, managing animals, negotiating performance differences, and keeping two young leads emotionally connected even when their working relationship became intensely strained. Most of the movie was shot in South Carolina, with Charleston and the surrounding lowcountry standing in for the story's broader southern setting. Cypress Gardens supplied the Blackwater landscape of the famous rowboat sequence, while the exterior of Noah's house came from a real property on Wadmalaw Island. The production didn't simply discover that house already looking abandoned. The residence was deliberately altered to appear neglected before being presented in its restored form. In other words, Noah spends the movie renovating a house that the filmmakers had first worked to ruin, cinema doing construction backward. And because the building remains a private home, what feels on screen like Noah's intensely personal sanctuary was, in reality, a carefully controlled location transformed for storytelling. The lake created an even stranger challenge. Those white birds surrounding Noah and Allie weren't simply waiting in the South Carolina swamp for a camera crew to arrive. The birds used for the sequence were brought in and acclimated to the location before filming, allowing them to appear naturally integrated into the landscape. That's the kind of invisible preparation audiences almost never notice. On screen, the sequence feels spontaneous, as though Noah casually rows Allie into some secret corner of nature where hundreds of birds happen to create the perfect romantic backdrop. Behind the image is planning, animal handling, location coordination, and patience. The illusion works precisely because none of that effort survives into the frame. Then there is Ryan Gosling, who approached Noah with the restless curiosity of an actor who wanted to interrogate practically everything about him. Cassavetes later remembered Gosling repeatedly bringing him character ideas, including one particularly dramatic suggestion: Noah should burn down the restored house. Gosling apparently saw destruction by fire as a kind of cleansing gesture for the character. Cassavetes rejected it. Good call. Burning the house might have produced striking imagery, but it would destroy the film's central physical metaphor. Noah's tragedy is that he keeps the dream intact long after Allie has disappeared. The house needs to survive because his inability to let go needs somewhere physical to live. Gosling also tried to coordinate details with James Garner, since they were portraying Noah at different ages. Cassavetes recalled that Gosling wanted to discuss matters like accent, hair, and even the fact that their eye colors didn't match. Garner apparently had little interest in over-engineering the continuity. His attitude was essentially that Gosling should make whatever choices worked for him. It's a funny clash of acting philosophies. Gosling was digging for connective tissue between two versions of Noah. Garner trusted presence and character more than microscopic physical matching. The film ultimately benefits from both. They don't look or sound perfectly identical. They feel emotionally related. The much more famous clash happened between Gosling and Rachel McAdams. Cassavetes later revealed that the two were struggling badly enough during one large scene that Gosling asked whether another actor could read opposite him off camera because he wasn't getting what he needed from McAdams. Cassavetes didn't replace her. Instead, Gosling and McAdams were put in a room with a producer and allowed to confront the problem directly. Voices rose. Frustrations came out. According to Cassavetes, the working relationship improved afterward, even if production didn't suddenly become frictionless. Years later, Cassavetes expressed regret about having made that private conflict public, which is worth remembering when these stories get recycled as romantic mythology. And here's what makes that story useful analytically. The tension shouldn't be treated as some magical explanation for their chemistry. Conflict doesn't automatically create good acting. What mattered was that Cassavetes found a way to keep two performers working together rather than allowing irritation to freeze their responsiveness. Noah and Allie require actors who can challenge one another without the scenes becoming mechanically hostile. Once Gosling and McAdams began channeling that intensity into the work, their disagreements could stay where they belonged, in the emotional behavior of the characters, rather than destroying the production around them. Cassavetes would later praise both actors for handling difficult material and emphasize the respect that developed between them. Even the rain-soaked reunion, the image most viewers probably assume happened through some lucky southern storm, had to be manufactured. Cassavetes has described bringing in rain machines for the sequence. That's filmmaking in miniature. Machinery creating spontaneity. Artificial water is pumped into a controlled set while actors perform an emotional eruption that has to look as though nature itself has joined the argument. The technical apparatus cannot be visible. Lighting has to catch the falling water. Dialogue must survive the noise. Continuity has to hold while clothes and hair become saturated. Yet the finished scene feels uncontrollable. That's the paradox of great romantic melodrama. The harder the crew works to control everything, the less controlled the emotion should appear. One of the best production stories came after principal photography, when studio executives wanted more visible emotion from Gena Rowlands during older Allie's moment of recognition. Cassavetes had to tell his mother, a legendary actress, that they needed a reshoot because the studio wanted her to cry more. She was not pleased. Cassavetes later recalled asking whether she could deliver what they wanted. Rowlands confidently insisted she could, then produced the tears on the first take. It's funny, intimidating, and revealing. The emotional spontaneity we see in the finished film sometimes came from extraordinarily precise professional control. That is the real behind-the-scenes story of The Notebook. Its romance feels accidental because hundreds of deliberate decisions are hidden underneath it. A private house is artificially aged. Birds are conditioned to a location. Rain arrives through machines. Actors clash, recalibrate, and continue. A veteran performer turns studio notes into a one-take emotional explosion. The production keeps manufacturing circumstances until the emotions no longer feel manufactured. And after all that effort came the question Hollywood eventually asks every love story. Did audiences actually show up? The Notebook didn't explode out of the gate like a blockbuster. Its commercial story was slower, stranger, and ultimately more impressive. A modestly budgeted romantic drama that kept finding viewers until its financial performance became only the beginning of its cultural life. For a movie that eventually became shorthand for modern screen romance, The Notebook did not arrive like a phenomenon. There was no gigantic opening weekend announcing a cultural event. Released by New Line Cinema on June 25, 2004, it opened with about $13.46 million from 2,303 theaters, good enough for fourth place behind Fahrenheit 9/11, White Chicks, and Dodgeball. That sounds almost strange in retrospect. The film people would still be quoting, parodying, and rewatching decades later wasn't even the biggest conversation at the multiplex that weekend. Its financial profile, however, was exactly the kind studios love when the numbers keep accumulating. Box Office Mojo lists a production budget of roughly $29 million. The original domestic theatrical run reached about $81 million, with the worldwide total landing around $118 million, depending on the database and accounting window used. Even before home entertainment entered the equation, that meant the film had generated several times its production budget in theatrical revenue. Box office gross isn't studio profit. Cinemas retain part of ticket sales, Marketing costs aren't included in that $29 million figure, and distribution expenses matter. But commercially, this was clearly no failed romance rescued by Reputation years later. The more revealing number is the relationship between opening weekend and final domestic gross. A $13.46 million debut eventually became roughly $81 million in North America. That's about 6 times the opening weekend, a strong indication that the movie wasn't living on opening night curiosity alone. People kept going. Friends recommended it. Couples discovered it. Viewers who had dismissed it as another sentimental Nicholas Sparks adaptation encountered the emotional wreckage being reported by people who had already seen it. Time later used the film as an example of how modest initial box office attention can be completely disconnected from long-term cultural impact. And that makes perfect sense for this particular movie. The Notebook isn't built around spoilers audiences had to rush out and discover before Monday morning. Its selling point is emotional experience. You already know what kind of film you're buying a ticket for. Romance, separation, tears. The question is whether it will actually get you. That makes word of mouth unusually powerful. Someone walking out emotionally destroyed isn't merely saying, "It was good." They're telling a friend, "You are going to cry." Suddenly, the audience recommendation becomes a dare. Then home video changed the scale of the story completely. The film reached DVD and VHS on February 8, 2005, right in the era when DVD ownership had become one of Hollywood's major revenue engines. The numbers currently estimates more than $95 million in U.S. DVD revenue and another roughly $5.9 million from Blu-ray sales. Those figures are estimates rather than audited studio accounts, but contemporary industry reporting confirms the larger point. The Notebook became a particularly strong home video performer. Variety reported in 2005 that it did roughly twice as much business on home video as it had theatrically. That matters because home viewing changed what The Notebook actually was as a commercial product. In theaters, you buy one experience. On DVD, the movie becomes an object. A date night choice, a breakup movie, something rediscovered with friends, something left on a shelf and pulled out whenever somebody wants emotional punishment disguised as entertainment. By 2010, reports cited more than 11 million DVD copies sold. That's how a successful theatrical romance becomes generational property. Repetition does what opening weekend cannot. New Line benefited from exactly this kind of mid-budget economics. Contemporary analysis of the DVD boom specifically pointed to The Notebook as an example of a smaller film whose value extended well beyond ticket sales, contrasting movies like it with expensive tentpoles that needed enormous theatrical grosses to justify themselves. That's the business lesson hiding beneath all the rain and piano music. A $29 million romantic drama doesn't need superhero numbers. It needs controlled costs, strong audience attachment, and a long commercial afterlife. The movie also increased the commercial value of practically everyone attached to it. Rachel McAdams emerged from 2004 with Mean Girls and The Notebook, establishing two completely different sides of her screen persona. Ryan Gosling's Noah helped transform him from respected young actor into romantic leading man material, even though he would spend much of his later career resisting that exact box. And Nicholas Sparks' adaptations gained an even clearer marketing blueprint. Attractive leads, sweeping longing, loss, separation, emotional sincerity. Years later, films adapted from his novels could be marketed partly through the audience memory of what The Notebook had already accomplished. So the commercial achievement wasn't that The Notebook conquered Hollywood in 3 days. It did something more valuable for a romance. It stayed. The opening was solid. The theatrical run multiplied that opening dramatically. Home video turned repeat viewing into serious revenue. Cultural familiarity then kept extending the movie's life beyond the economics of its original release. But commercial endurance doesn't automatically mean critical approval. In 2004, reviewers were far less united about the movie than its later cultural status might suggest. Some saw emotional authenticity beneath the melodrama. Others saw manipulation, cliché, and sentiment piled dangerously high. And that split between what critics evaluated and what audiences embraced is where The Notebook's reputation becomes truly fascinating. The strange thing about The Notebook is that its cultural reputation eventually became much warmer than its critical reputation ever was. More than 2 decades after release, IMDb users rate the film 7.8 out of 10, yet Rotten Tomatoes still places its critic approval at only 54%, while Metacritic sits at 53 out of 100 from 34 reviews. That's not the statistical profile of an undisputed masterpiece. It's the profile of something more interesting. A movie that half the critical establishment regarded as excessive or manipulative, while enormous numbers of ordinary viewers simply refused to care. They felt something. For a romance, that can matter more than elegance. The criticism was easy to understand. Rotten Tomatoes' consensus essentially argues that the film's unapologetic sentimentality is admirable, while its manipulation and melodramatic cliches hold it back. And The Notebook certainly gives critics plenty of ammunition. Rich Girl, Poor Boy, Disapproving Parents, Lost Letters, War, Another Fiancé, A Restored Dream House, Rain During the Emotional Confession, Dementia, Death. The movie doesn't merely approach melodrama, it walks directly into the center of it and starts decorating. Viewers resistant to emotional engineering can practically feel every mechanism operating. Nick Cassavetes wants tears, and he's not pretending otherwise. Roger Ebert saw something more genuine underneath the machinery. He gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, praising both Robert Friess's photography and the emotional credibility the actors bring to the material. Metacritic's archive reflects that wider split. Some reviews regarded the movie as lush and affecting, while others saw its storytelling as overwrought. That's the critical battle in miniature. Nobody really disagreed about what The Notebook was attempting. The disagreement was over whether deliberately pulling emotional strings invalidates the emotion that follows, and that's where audiences overwhelmingly sided with the movie. Contemporary CinemaScore polling gave it an A much stronger response than the mixed professional reviews suggested. The gap makes sense because audiences often experience melodrama differently from critics. A critic may notice the structure telegraphing an emotional payoff. A viewer may notice that their throat has tightened anyway. The Notebook isn't designed to hide the machinery completely. It practically announces where the tears are coming. The achievement is that millions of viewers still walked willingly toward them. Awards reflected that audience enthusiasm more clearly than traditional prestige institutions did. James Garner received a Screen Actors Guild nomination for Supporting Actor, recognition that validated the quieter, older timeline even when much of the film's publicity revolved around Gosling and McAdams. But the prize that became part of pop culture arrived at the 2005 MTV Movie Awards, where Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams won Best Kiss. Instead of simply accepting the trophy, they recreated the physical energy of their rain-soaked kiss on stage. The audience exploded. 2 decades later, Vanity Fair was still describing footage of that moment as something repeatedly rediscovered online. That MTV moment mattered because it blurred the boundary between movie romance and celebrity mythology. Gosling and McAdams were dating by then, which gave audiences the irresistible fantasy that Noah and Allie's chemistry had somehow escaped the screen. The film stopped being only a fictional romance and became attached to a real-world relationship people could project onto. Never mind that the actors themselves later emphasized that their actual relationship was nothing like Noah and Allie's. The mythology had already formed. Movie kiss, real couple. Suddenly, the marketing campaign had acquired an afterlife nobody could have planned. But cultural affection eventually produced an equally strong backlash. By the film's 10th anniversary, Time published an entire critique attacking the romantic relationship as unhealthy, pointing directly to Noah's Ferris wheel threat, the couple's volatile fighting, the predictability of the framing device, and what the writer saw as excessive emotional manipulation. Those criticisms have only become harder to dismiss as conversations about coercion and unhealthy romantic behavior have become more sophisticated. Noah's early pursuit of Allie is framed as daring persistence. Taken outside the conventions of romantic comedy, some of that behavior is genuinely alarming. That doesn't automatically destroy the film, but it changes how parts of it play. The Ferris wheel scene once functioned almost entirely as evidence that Noah would do anything to get Allie's attention. A contemporary viewer may instead notice that he's manufacturing pressure until she agrees to a date. Their fighting can read as intoxicating passion or exhausting dysfunction, depending on what you bring to it. And here's where the Notebook becomes richer than simple nostalgia. Its emotional force survives even while parts of its romantic ideal become easier to question. You can believe Noah and Allie love each other profoundly without treating every behavior between them as something worth copying. The dementia storyline has faced another kind of scrutiny because the film uses cognitive decline as both tragedy and romantic test. Yet, Gina Rowlands and James Garner give those scenes enough gravity that they resist becoming purely mechanical tear-jerking. Even reviewers who dislike the surrounding sentiment often praise the veteran actors, and Garner's SAG nomination confirms that those performances registered beyond the movie's fan base. The older storyline forces the youthful romance to confront something most romantic movies avoid. Loving someone isn't only about being desired by them. Sometimes it means continuing when recognition disappears. That may explain why the film outlived its original reviews. Critics judged the construction. Audiences remembered the sensation. The critical weaknesses never vanished. The cliches remain cliches. Some behavior has aged badly, and the ending pushes sentiment until subtlety has left the building. But the performances, imagery, music, and central idea kept winning viewers back. Even in 2024, the MTV Kiss was still being revisited as a piece of early 2000s cultural mythology, while the movie itself remained a reference point for romantic melodrama. And that brings us to the final question. Strip away the rain, the box office, the celebrity romance, the awards, and the reputation. What is the Notebook actually saying? Beneath the sweeping gestures is a film obsessed with memory, class, choice, aging, and the frightening possibility that love may survive even after the mind holding its history begins to disappear. That's where its lasting meaning lies, and where its flaws become impossible to separate from its power. Strip away the rain, the White House, the letters, and the endlessly replayed kiss. And the Notebook is ultimately asking a frighteningly simple question. If memory disappears, what remains of love? Everything else grows around that idea. Noah and Allie spend their youth trying to preserve a relationship against parents, class, distance, and time. Decades later, those obstacles suddenly look almost manageable compared with dementia. You can fight a disapproving mother. You can rebuild a house. You can write 365 letters. But how do you fight the disappearance of the shared past itself? The film's answer is sentimental, perhaps impossibly so. You keep telling the story. That's why the Notebook is more than a narrative gimmick. It becomes an external memory for Allie. When her own mind can no longer reliably hold Noah, the written story holds him for her. Names, places, arguments, choices. Their life survives on paper until language occasionally unlocks recognition. The device turns storytelling into an act of caregiving. Older Noah isn't reading because he enjoys nostalgia. He's repeatedly reconstructing their marriage for the person who lived it with him. Each reading carries an awful possibility. Maybe today the story will remain just a story. Maybe she won't realize she's listening to herself. The romance therefore evolves from will they end up together into something much harder. Can togetherness still exist when one person no longer remembers why you're there? The second major theme is choice. The Notebook loves the language of destiny, but its characters actually spend the movie making painful decisions. Allie isn't magically carried toward Noah by fate. She has to choose him against a socially respectable future with Lon. Noah likewise chooses to preserve a love that has repeatedly hurt him. Even decades later, staying beside Allie remains a choice he keeps making. That distinction matters because destiny alone would make them passive. The film's emotional argument is stronger than that. Love may feel inevitable, but relationships are built from repeated decisions after inevitability has stopped being romantic. Class gives those decisions their first real weight. Noah and Allie aren't separated because they lack chemistry. They're separated because the Hamilton family understands marriage partly as social architecture. Allie's future has a shape already. Education, wealth, respectability. the correct husband, the correct household. Noah disrupts that structure because he offers desire without status. Joan Allen's revelation that Anne once loved a working-class man makes the conflict particularly sharp. The mother isn't simply defending class prejudice. She is passing down her own surrender. She chose security once and nearly forces her daughter to repeat the pattern. Allie's rebellion, therefore, isn't only romantic. She's interrupting an inherited compromise. Yet the film's idea of love deserves resistance, too. Noah's persistence is presented as proof of emotional purity, even when his early behavior crosses into coercive territory. Hanging from a Ferris wheel until Allie agrees to date him may operate within the heightened grammar of romantic comedy, but viewed outside that grammar, it isn't charming behavior. The couple's explosive arguments can also be mistaken for evidence that constant volatility equals passion. The film sometimes confuses intensity with health. That criticism has followed The Notebook through its cultural afterlife, particularly as later viewers have reconsidered romantic behaviors. Older Hollywood narratives routinely framed as persistence rather than pressure. But rejecting those elements doesn't require rejecting everything the film understands about love. Its mature insight is almost the opposite of Noah's youthful pursuit. Older Noah cannot force anything. He cannot demand that Allie remember. He cannot argue dementia into submission. He can only remain present. That transformation is crucial. Young Noah expresses love through pursuit, confrontation, and grand gestures. Older Noah expresses it through patience, reading the same story, sitting in the same room, accepting moments of recognition without assuming they'll last. The character moves from, "I will make this happen," toward "I will stay even when I can't make anything happen." That's a far more difficult kind of devotion. Aging gives the movie its most devastating contrast. Most romantic films end when the lovers choose each other, because that allows the fantasy to remain untouched by everything that follows. Routine, illness, resentment, caregiving, mortality. The Notebook cheats a little. It skips most of the ordinary decades between youthful passion and old age, but it at least insists those decades exist. Gosling becomes Garner. McAdams becomes Rowlands. The bodies that once ran through summer streets eventually move carefully through institutional hallways. Romance isn't protected from time. Time becomes the final antagonist. The portrayal of dementia is emotionally potent rather than clinically comprehensive. Psychological commentary on the film has pointed out that it simplifies aspects of Alzheimer's disease. That's an important limitation. Allie's sudden windows of recognition operate beautifully as drama, but viewers shouldn't mistake a romantic melodrama for a medical model of cognitive decline. Yet Gina Rowlands gives those scenes enough terror and dignity that the illness never feels like mere decoration. The devastation isn't simply that Allie forgets facts. She loses access to the emotional meaning connecting those facts together. Then comes the ending, Noah and Allie dying together, hand in hand. Realistic? Barely. Subtle? Absolutely not. But subtlety has never been this film's ambition. The ending turns their relationship into myth, pushing the movie's central promise as far as it can possibly go. If dementia cannot permanently separate them, perhaps even death won't be allowed the final victory. You can roll your eyes at that idea and still understand why it has destroyed audiences for more than 2 decades. And endurance is now part of the film's legacy. On its 20th anniversary in 2024, Cassavetes and Nicholas Sparks were still discussing how the film had grown into a romantic touchstone far beyond its initially mixed reception. Its cultural reach expanded beyond film as well. A stage musical based on Sparks's story opened on Broadway in March 2024, with music and lyrics by Ingrid Michaelson and a book by Becca Brunstetter, before completing its Broadway run that December. A romance that began as a 1996 novel had successfully survived another transformation, book to movie to stage, because the basic emotional proposition remains instantly understandable. So where does The Notebook finally stand? It's manipulative, absolutely. It contains romantic behavior worth questioning, presses emotional buttons with zero embarrassment, and occasionally piles coincidence upon sentiment until realism quietly leaves the room. But those weaknesses exist beside real strengths. Rachel McAdams' layered performance, Ryan Gosling's intensity, Garner and Rowland's heartbreaking restraint, Robert Frase's memory-soaked photography, Aaron Zigman's intimate score, and Cassavetes' refusal to approach emotion with irony. Most importantly, the film understands something simple that technically subtler romances sometimes forget. People don't remember relationships as perfectly balanced screenplays. They remember fragments: a song, a house, a fight, a letter never received, the clothes someone wore, rain hitting their face, the moment somebody came back. The Notebook turns those fragments into mythology. And maybe that's why people keep returning to it. Not because Noah and Allie represent perfect love. They don't. They represent the fantasy that somewhere beneath all the mistakes, distance, aging, and forgetting, something essential can remain. And that if memory fails, someone who loves us might remember enough for both of us.